On a cold January afternoon in 1919, the bustling north end of Boston was filled with the sounds of industry. Workers shouting, streetcars clanging, and the rhythmic hum of ships docking nearby. But within minutes, that ordinary day turned into one of the strangest disasters in American history. A catastrophe so absurd it sounds like fiction. It became known as the Great Molasses Flood, a day when a giant wave of sticky syrup tore through the city, killing 21 people and injuring over 150. The story begins with the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, which owned a massive steel tank on Commercial Street. The tank stood 50 feet high and 90 feet wide, holding more than 2.3 million gallons of molasses, a dark, thick syrup imported from the Caribbean to produce industrial alcohol. The tank loomed over the waterfront, an engineering symbol of the booming industrial age. But there was one major problem. The tank was built cheaply and rushed into service. From the day it was filled, local residents complained of leaks. Children would sneak over with cups to collect molasses dripping down its sides. Workers heard the metal groan and creak, but management ignored the warnings. The company was in a hurry. They needed to produce alcohol for the wartime industry, and safety took a backseat to profit. Then came January 15, 1919. The temperature had suddenly risen from a freezing night to an unseasonably warm afternoon. The sun beat down on the cold, brittle steel tank, causing the molasses inside to expand. Just after noon, witnesses reported hearing a low rumble, like the sound of distant thunder, followed by an ear-splitting metallic roar. At exactly 12:30 p.m., the massive tank exploded. The force was so powerful that witnesses said the ground shook like an earthquake. A monstrous wave of molasses, 25 feet high and moving at nearly 35 miles per hour, burst into the streets. Buildings were torn off their foundations. Horses and wagons were swallowed whole. Streetcars were lifted from their tracks. People who tried to run found their legs trapped by the thick, sticky sludge. Firefighter George Leigh, one of the first responders, described the scene as a brown tidal wave of death. The syrup engulfed everything in its path, crushing structures, snapping fences, and dragging victims beneath. The molasses was so dense that rescuers couldn't move through it. Every step was a struggle, as though wading through quicksand. When the wave finally settled, Boston's North End was buried under 2 to 3 feet of molasses. The smell hung in the air for weeks. Horses suffocated where they stood. Survivors described seeing bodies trapped in syrup, frozen in time. Rescue efforts went on for days, as crews tried to dig through the sticky debris. When the syrup finally settled, Boston looked like a war zone. Buildings were twisted and broken, debris scattered everywhere, and the once bustling streets were silent except for the faint sound of rescue workers shouting through the wreckage. Within hours, firefighters, police, and sailors from nearby ships rushed in to help. They battled against the cold, the darkness, and the suffocating stickiness that made every step a nightmare. The molasses clung to their boots, their clothes, and their tools, making even simple movements exhausting. Rescue efforts stretched late into the night. Floodlights illuminated a city coated in brown sugar sludge. Horses had to be shot because they were hopelessly trapped. Human victims were pulled out one by one, many unrecognizable. The sweet smell that filled the air soon turned sickly, mixing with saltwater and the stench of decay. In total, 21 people lost their lives, and more than 150 were injured. The victims were workers, children, and pedestrians who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. One firehouse had been completely crushed, trapping firefighters inside until rescuers broke through. The destruction was immense. Entire blocks were ruined, and property damage exceeded $100,000, around $1.5 million today. But as the shock faded, the public demanded answers. How could something so bizarre and deadly happen in the heart of a major city? A massive investigation followed, one of the first large-scale forensic engineering inquiries in U.S. history. The truth was even uglier than anyone expected. The United States Industrial Alcohol Company had rushed construction, ignored leaks, and used thin steel plates that were never tested for strength. Engineers later discovered the steel was too brittle to withstand temperature changes, and the seams were poorly riveted. Even worse, the company never hired a qualified engineer to approve the tank's design. Documents revealed that company officials knew about the leaks but painted the tank brown to hide them. Witnesses had heard groaning noises for months before the explosion, yet nothing was done. The negligence was undeniable. When the court cases began, the company blamed everything: anarchists, sabotage, even the weather, but not their own design flaws. The hearings lasted 5 years, making it one of the longest civil suits in Massachusetts history. After 5 years of testimony, witnesses, and scientific examination, the verdict finally came in 1925. The court ruled that the United States Industrial Alcohol Company was indeed responsible for the disaster. It was a defining moment in corporate accountability. The company was ordered to pay over $1 million in damages, equivalent to more than $17 million today, to the victims and their families. This ruling did more than just provide compensation. It changed how cities and companies handled industrial safety. For the first time, Boston required that any major structure be reviewed and certified by a licensed engineer before approval. The case also influenced future building codes across the United States, helping establish stricter safety standards and public oversight. But even with justice served, the physical and emotional scars lingered. For years, residents claimed the smell of molasses never truly left the North End. It seeped into the cracks of cobblestone streets, wooden piers, and even the walls of nearby homes. Firefighters who worked on the cleanup said that every time the sun grew warm, a faint sugary scent would rise again from the ground. The cleanup itself was monumental. Crews used salt water from the harbor and sand to absorb the syrup, but even then, the sticky mess spread across the city. Workers tracked molasses into streetcars, offices, and homes. The Boston Post reported that the entire harbor turned brown for weeks. In the decades that followed, the Great Molasses Flood became both a tragic lesson and a darkly humorous piece of folklore. It was a reminder of how negligence and haste can turn something as harmless as molasses into a deadly force. Today, few physical traces of the disaster remain, but its story endures. A small plaque now stands at the site, marking the event that once left Boston covered in sweetness and sorrow. Historians still cite it as an example of industrial hubris, a time when progress outran caution. More than a century later, people still visit the North End, unaware that beneath their feet, the streets once flowed with a river of syrup. And in the quiet moments after a warm rain, locals still say you can smell a faint hint of molasses in the air, a ghostly reminder of the day Boston drowned in sugar.